Witherspoon would sign a long-term contract, King said, the suspension would be lifted.
He said, the commission is me. He said, I'm the commission. Them guys ain't nothing. He said, real? He said, it's me. I said, he said, well, the only way to get lifted up if you sign this deal with me. And I said, well, I'm not signing it. And I went home, and like I said, the money was like, I was pulling mothballs out my pocket.
With no money and no license, Witherspoon soon reconsidered. He went to Don King's office in New York City. According to Witherspoon, King spread 4 contracts on the table. He promised to have the suspension lifted and give Witherspoon a shot at the title if Witherspoon would sign and accept King's stepson Carl as his manager. A manager and a promoter have separate responsibilities. A manager looks after the fighters, a promoter looks after the events. But Don King pulled all the strings, reducing his stepson to a puppet.
Don said, Carl is me, I'm Carl. He always used that phrase, so-and-so is me, that means that's him all the way. I never really sat down and talked with Carl about nothing, got to do with management. He always would come to me and say, I got to ask my dad something. My dad sent me over here to see what y'all need.
But Carl King would get 50% of Witherspoon's earnings, even though a 50% take by a manager is prohibited by boxing rules. King got around that problem by having Witherspoon sign 2 managerial contracts, one for the 50% fee and another, which would be filed with the state boxing commissions, which called for a legal 33% fee. King also had Witherspoon sign a contract which was totally blank.
Did you think about bringing a lawyer to this meeting?
He said you don't need, we couldn't do that. We weren't allowed to do that. Even in the past, even after that, he had told me don't, because we wanted a representation, and he said, if you got to do that, don't come.
Here he is, the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, Larry Holmes.
King kept his word. He got the suspension lifted, and then got Witherspoon a title fight.
Larry's hurt.
Keep a look. We'll keep.
Larry's hurt.
Yes, he is.
He's hurt.
He's hurt now. We're in the ninth round. The underdog, Witherspoon.
Witherspoon fought one of the best fights of his career, but lost in a split decision.
Retaining his title in his 15th defense, Larry Holmes. In the mind of Tim Witherspoon, he has to believe he won.
Witherspoon was paid $53,000 for the fight. But he soon learned that another fighter, who was knocked out by Holmes a few months later, got paid 6 times as much, $350,000. This fighter had someone other than the Kings managing his career. Witherspoon could still celebrate. King was getting him the fights, and Witherspoon figured when he was champion, like Larry Holmes, the $1 million paydays would come.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, presenting from Philadelphia, the champion, Tim Witherspoon.
By the summer of 1986, Witherspoon was the heavyweight champion and felt his big payday had finally come. King had made a match for him to defend his title in England against British champion Frank Bruno. He first heard the news through his manager, Carl King.
He said, if we're going over there, we getting paid. He said, it's got to be a lot of money, right? That's the first time he said anything like that to me, right? So he said, I'm going to go ask my father what we're going to get.
And from West Ham, London, the challenger, Frank Bruno.
I know that when you go into another country with your title, you're getting paid double. You're not going there in his backyard to fight for pennies. I knew this, you know? So I said, hey, I said, hey, I know I'm going to be rich now.
What did you imagine you were going to be paid?
I imagine, I thought within myself that I knew I was going to get robbed, but he would be generous and give me maybe 600, 700,000. I knew I had Frank Bruno. I knew I had him. Whether it was the 11th round, I knew that he was wearing down. We both landed rights, but mine landed more flush. When I hit him and saw that wobble, I said, it's mine.
Bruno is in a heap of trouble here.
And I put all of it in, and I pulled an overhand right arm, boom, and it bent him down. He went into rope, and then I finished him off, boom, and he went down. I was the happiest man in the world. And the guys was in the ring, so I was the happiest man in the world. And that kind of good feeling, it made my soreness feel good.
Later that night, Witherspoon and Carl King met up with Muhammad Ali. Witherspoon had been a former sparring partner for Ali. Now, he was the champion.
That was the greatest thing in my life that I could experience, right? But you know what Ali said to me? He whispered in my ears. He said, I know you're getting robbed. I swear. He said, I know you ain't gonna get all your money. But joking, and I laughed at him, you know?
The fight generated millions of dollars in revenue, including a total gate of $2 million and $1.7 million more for the American television rights. But when Tim Witherspoon got home, he received a check for only $90,000. He immediately called Don King.
He said, Timmy? I said, yeah, Don, what's all this here, 90,000? He said, well, really what it is 90, is half, you got a nickel. He said, you got a nickel, Carl get his cut, and then you had expenses. I said, man, this is crazy.
King's reference to a nickel meant that Witherspoon's share of the purse was $500,000. King then subtracted expenses, the biggest being $250,000 for his stepson Carl. To make matters worse, Witherspoon found out that the challenger, Frank Bruno, got paid $900,000.
And now, my good friends, introducing the principals.
Witherspoon was totally demoralized when he faced his next opponent, James Bone Crusher Smith. But King had put himself in a no-lose situation. Without Witherspoon's knowledge, King had made his stepson Carl Bone Crusher's manager on the eve of the fight. This meant that Carl King was managing both fighters in the same match, a conflict of interest unusual even by boxing standards. Witherspoon lost his title in the first round. But in defeat, he had won liberation from Don King.
I was happy. It was over because I didn't want to be around Don King anymore. I knew that was it. And I was so happy after the fight, I didn't care.
Tom Moran is Witherspoon's friend and current manager.
No, at that point I realized that it was something that was so much bigger than Tim and so much more powerful, that Don King was, at that time, probably, if not the most powerful person in sports. He was certainly up there in the top 2 or 3. And boxing was a sport where it was kind of Tim against Don King one-on-one, and Don King's a sharp, slick individual, and you can't expect somebody like Tim, who's got an amazing skill in one area, to have those kind of skills in another area. And I felt that he was just a victim of the situation in that sport.
Tim Witherspoon was now broke. He filed a $25 million lawsuit against Don and Carl King, alleging fraud and conflict of interest. King retaliated by blacklisting Witherspoon from fighting any boxer he promoted, which included most of the top 10 heavyweights. After some damaging pretrial evidence was obtained by his lawyers, Witherspoon says threats and intimidation followed.
How can Don intimidate you?
He has a lot of money. Money is power. And I'm sure everybody knows what can come after that. I mean, everybody knows that, put it this way, I have got as far as arming myself. Arming myself for protection reasons and stuff like that.
You fear physical violence?
Oh, that's in the game. That's in the game.
He's just playing it safe. He's
Tom
trying
Moran
to protect his
repeated to
family
me
and not
that the
getting in any
threats were
trouble.
real.
He was threatened that if he didn't settle the lawsuit by the end of the week, he wasn't going to have to worry about settling the lawsuit because he wasn't going to be breathing. So
I've heard charges that Don King uses his long association with the mob to intimidate boxers like Witherspoon. But King vehemently denies any connection with organized crime. So I visited Joe Spinelli, who is New York's top corruption investigator. Spinelli investigated King for the FBI from 1980 to 1984.
How much, if any, organized crime involvement did you find with Don King?
Well, throughout the course of the investigation, I had individuals who were informants for the FBI provide me on a regular basis with information that King was meeting with organized crime figures. Also, in the course of the investigation, I had an individual who was the then trainer of Larry Holmes, Richard Giacchetti, provide me with a consensually recorded tape that he had with Don King, in which Don King himself talks about having had to sit down with an organized crime figure because of a dispute with a rival promoter.
Both the mob and King benefited from this relationship. According to a New Jersey Crime Commission report, mobsters got lucrative closed-circuit TV deals for some of King's fights. And several fighters told me King used organized crime to intimidate them. Blinky Palermo, known as organized crime's ambassador to boxing, was often used by King as an intimidating messenger to Witherspoon and other Philadelphia fighters. Palermo fixed fights and went to prison in the 1960s for trying to extort control over a boxing champion. When Richard Giacchetti, Larry Holmes' trainer, turned over to the FBI 6 secretly recorded conversations with King, Giacchetti began to get death threats. In a secretly recorded conversation with an FBI informant in 1981, Giacchetti said he had been warned by a mafia hitman to lay off King. But the Justice Department never prosecuted King for racketeering. Holmes and his trainer, Giacchetti, balked before the grand jury.
That's a perfect example, Jack, of what I'm talking about a fighter who was intimidated and just could not come forward and tell the truth.
Today, a federal grand jury indicted Don King and Constance Harper, president and vice president of Don King Productions, in 23 counts.
The best the feds could ever do was indict King in 1984 for tax evasion. King was acquitted of all charges. 6 months later, he flew the jurors to London to see the Bruno Witherspoon fight as a token of his appreciation. Last March, I came to Vegas searching for Don King. King had refused my request for an interview for several months, and I thought the press conference before the Tyson-Ruddock fight would be an opportunity to seek him out in person.
I don't want to predict and prognosticate and tell a lie.
King was working the reporters individually when he began to criticize Bob Lee and the International Boxing Federation for ranking black South African fighters.
Bobby Lee is no longer fit to be the president of an organization. He's dealing with South Africa.
King's tirade began when I asked him about his own dealings in South Africa.
Don, can we talk to this for a second? What about the million you got from Sun City?
Well, the million I got from Sun City, and this I'm going to say to you because to me, you means nothing, because you have been one of the guys who have vilified me, crucified me, castigated me all throughout my career, not objectively, not fair and impartially. No, let me talk now. We made 3 appointments with you to give you another thing. As far as I'm concerned, you're a scumbag. I don't have no use for you at all. You may be the greatest if you think you're the greatest, but to me, to you as a man to man, you are nothing. You are dirt, and I just walk around you to keep them stepping in it. So you have to worry about me. So I don't have no use for you, Jack Newfield. Yes, I made the mistake. I made the mistake of not going to South Africa.
Then Don King did something I've never seen him do. He admitted he'd been wrong.
I stand reproved. I apologize for what I did because I understand that it was wrong. Even though I didn't go there, I thought I could do it at an arm's length transaction.